Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the East Tennessee History Center. My name is Dr. Warren Doctor. I'm the President and CEO of the East Tennessee Historical Society, so on behalf of the Society, welcome to everyone. We're very, very honored. It's a real pleasure to have everyone here tonight. I'm contractually obligated to say if you're not a member of the East Tennessee Historical Society, we would love for you to join up so that we can continue to host these kinds of programs and bring this to our community here in Knoxville and more broadly across East Tennessee. So please do think of us if you're thinking of joining a historical society. Next, I would just like to say that it is a tremendous honor to be working with the Tennessee Holocaust Commission and to be hosting them this evening. It's also a profound honor to welcome our speaker tonight. And I should just say personally, I first heard the name Michael Berenbaum when I was in my past life. I was an academic in the UK, and I worked with Dan Stone and Dr. David Ziering. I've never been able to say his name very well, which he often laughed at me for. When I worked at Royal Holloway in London, which is where he was at, David Ziering. That's close enough. And Dan Stone at the Holocaust Research Institute. So this is a tremendous honor for me. And so I also say another tremendous honor is that we're hosting Allison Vick, who is the program coordinator for the Tennessee Holocaust Commission. Will be coming up and saying a couple words. She's a professor at Pellissippi State. And it's also another great honor, I think, between us is that we shared a supervisor at the University of Tennessee whose name is Dr. Vegas Lulevicius, who was my undergraduate supervisor 400 million years ago in the Jurassic era. And so it's my pleasure to introduce Allison Vick.
Thank you, Warren. Yeah, Vegas is a cherished figure between both of us and among a lot of the UT crowd here. But I just have to say, equally, it's been a supreme pleasure to work with Warren and the entire East Tennessee Historical Society these past 8 months as we've pulled programming together. It's delightful to work with all of you, and we're looking forward to seeing what future partnerships are ahead. Similarly, I know I speak for Alyssa and Ken, my colleagues, when I say that we had excellent partnership with the Karski Educational Foundation, who was responsible for ensuring that we received the exhibit that you see on display tonight. And then two of our board members I have to really recognize, our excellent chair, who we all cherish, Rabbi Mark Shifton. Rabbi Shifton, I know you're here somewhere. Yep, he's in the back hiding. But who has been an extraordinary support of all the work that we've been doing. And unfortunately, our other board member could not be here tonight, but I know he deeply wishes he could. Our board member, Tom Wood, who knew Professor Karski very well and wrote an exceptional biography of him and whose work continues to capture my intrigue. But I think tonight especially, our whole team has to extend our thanks to Dr. Michael Berenbaum, who arranged his schedule to make sure that he could come and support us and participate with us right before Passover. And so I have to just say one thing very briefly about him, and that is I first knew Dr. Berenbaum several years ago, probably a decade ago, through his extensive scholarship on the Holocaust. I was a grad student and absolutely was transformed by the message that so clearly resonates throughout all of his work, which is, to me, I have shared this catastrophic history with you to strengthen you so that you may remember, and now thou shalt be an upstander. So his contributions to this field are incomparable. He was the project director that oversaw the creation of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. He also served as its research director at the Research Institute, and subsequently the CEO of Steven Spielberg's Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, which captured the testimony of 52,000 Holocaust survivors across 57 countries and in 32 different languages. His film work has won Emmy and Academy Awards, and he is also a director and curator of Holocaust museums around the world, including the United States, Poland, North Macedonia, and Mexico. And recently, our team had the privilege to see the traveling exhibition that he was a lead on, Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away. He's currently a professor at American Jewish University in California and is an incredible faculty member. And of course, 24 books and scholarly pieces, innumerable at this point. So, in the recent years I've been privileged to know Michael. I just have to say that despite the demands and rigors of his time, he's consistently found time to consult with me on several different things, no matter how seemingly small. And really, had, perhaps most significantly for me, encouraged me when I needed it the very most. And so it is truly my privilege and pleasure to welcome him here tonight to Knoxville.
I'll tell you, after such an introduction, I hesitate to speak. Thank you, Allison. Allison has had a very difficult time, she's introduced me. I think this is now the third or fourth time. This time says something a little bit different each time, but you are privileged to have Allison in your community, and her work and the work of the Tennessee Holocaust Commission is inspiring and important. I'm honored to be here today. I come here in really two capacities, which is, number one, I will speak of the mission of Jan Karski, but number two, I'll speak of the person of Jan Karski, because I taught with him at Georgetown University, and we went back for a very long time, and we were friends. And the other thing I will say, and I even had the privilege of speaking at his funeral, which is how close we were. And in fact, at his funeral, the Jewish community of Warsaw sent over a Jewish star. So he was buried in St. Matthew's Cathedral in a coffin which had him with a Jewish star, in which he entered the next world with a Jewish star, as we'll hear as to why that was important. And I recited the Kaddish prayer, which is the Jewish memorial prayer. And one of my, a man who was the chief rabbi of Israel at that point, who was far more orthodox and far more traditional, was asked whether one could recite the Kaddish prayer in a church. And he decided to answer it in the following way. He said, "I'm not sure about that, but I know if there's anybody for whom the Kaddish prayer should be said, it was Jan Karski." So he dodged a bullet and had me dodge a bullet and the like. Let me talk just on one level. I've had the privilege of meeting many important people, including Nobel Prize winners during the course of my career. But there's only one man that I've met whom I always felt when I was with him, I was in the presence of nobility. And there's a difference between being a Nobel Prize winner and being a man of nobility. And that tells you a little bit about who Jan Karski was. He stood tall, rammed straight, even in his latter years when other men might stoop. He was thin as a rail and acted as if food was no concern. He spoke with clarity and precision, with a sense of dignity, and conveyed with his great moral stature. He weighed his word carefully, and from time to time, he drifted back to the time and the place which transformed his life, which shattered his soul. One sensed in his presence the anguish of what he had seen, the burden that he had bore. He had come to incarnate the role of messenger. Now, those of us in Holocaust studies, and the greatest of the last generation scholars of Holocaust studies was a man by the name of Ronald Hilberg. We call him the Dean of the Field. He wrote a book saying there were perpetrators, victims, and bystanders, and the field has since come to correct him because it added an extraordinary new title to that, and it added the title upstander. What's the opposite of bystander? The opposite of bystander is upstander. somebody who doesn't stand by and let things happen, but somebody who stands up and does something. And in a very real sense, Karski was not only an upstander, but as we'll see, he had a very unique role, almost a quasi-prophetic role, which is he was a messenger, a voice for the voiceless, and he'd come into the world to do what the prophets of ancient Israel did, which is to comfort the afflicted, but equally important, to afflict the comfortable. And that becomes enormously important as we speak. Let's talk about Karski. Karski was a member of the Polish underground. He brought news of the Polish government in exile to the Western world, sneaking between and scampering around between the borders of German-occupied Poland and going in first to France and later to England. He was once caught, and when he was caught, he was tortured. And that night, after they brought him back to his holding cell, he slit his wrists, figuring that he did not have the strength to hold out against torture and fearing that he might betray. He then was sent to the hospital, and he understood he was about to die. He then did something quite remarkable. He said, "I would like to die as a Roman Catholic, and therefore, before I die, please send a priest so I can make my confession." And he met with the priest, and he spoke to the priest, and he turned to the priest and he said, "You have to tell the resistance that I am here." The priest scolded him, "How can you, shatter the sanctity of the confession?" And I'm looking at a priest. "How can you shatter the sanctity of the confession and impose this on me?" And lo and behold, that evening a nun came to him as he was to die in the morning and said, "At 12 midnight, I want you to open the window of the hospital room and jump." Where, what, how, we don't know. He did, and essentially the priest had also violated, the quotation marks, the sanctity of the confession, and he had turned over the information to the Polish resistance, and Karski was rescued. His name was not Karski by birth, his name was Kozalewski, and he was blessed with an exceptional mind. He had essentially a photographic memory, and that became essential to his work as a messenger. And the reason it became essential is he could deliver a message to, first of all, you have to understand, the Poles were politically divided. Even the government in exile was a coalition government in exile, united only by their hatred of German occupation. But they were a government in exile with multiple forces, and he met with different sources in the Polish community and was able to tell each source in the Polish community the message that they wanted to deliver to their people without revealing to them the messages that other conflicting groups wanted to deliver to other people. He was able to do the same thing for the Jewish community. He decided that before, on what turned out to his last mission, weeks before Rabbi Stephen Wise had heard of the confirmation of mass murder by gassing of Jews, he was asked if he would carry information regarding the Jews to London. He agreed to meet with two Jewish leaders who ordinarily would be at odds with each other. One was a Bundist who envisioned a Jewish future as a respected minority in independent democratic Poland. and the other was a Zionist who saw the only viable future for the Jews as an independent nation in Palestine. Yet under current circumstances, they too could unite, or almost unite, because they faced a common enemy bent on their destruction, namely the Germans. They wanted Karski to carry their plea to the world. In order to be credible, he said, I must go into the ghetto. The ghetto, you have to understand, was circled by an 11-foot-high brick wall with barbed wire on top, and the only way into the ghetto was through the sewer system, or else you had to go late at night and climb over the wall and make sure you didn't get caught up in the barbed wire. And Karski twice went into the sewer system, and you have to understand what that means. It means you have to be prepared, and you'll forgive my language, but you can only be truthfully graphic. You have to be prepared to walk in feces in order to bear witness. We can say, you'll hear the word, you've probably heard the word once or twice before, you have to be able to walk right into shit. And that's what he did. He went in twice. He also then asked to go to a place he thought was Belzec. It turned out to be Travniki. It turned out to be Izbika. Izbika was the way station for Jews who were being deported to Belzec. It's where they held them while the trains were able to schedule their arrival. Belzec was the death camp in which 500,000 Jews were killed in 10 months. 50,000 or more a month, with 2 known survivors. And Izbika was the place they held the trains to balance. He went in there dressed as a Ukrainian guard, and his problem was he didn't speak Ukrainian. He couldn't go as a Pole. And after he was there for a brief period of time, he ran away, fearing that what he saw and his response to what he saw would betray him. Now you have to understand that to understand what it means. If you were an ordinary guard and you saw what was happening, your eyes didn't pay attention. You pretended either not to see, or what you saw was not extraordinary. But if you were coming from an ordinary world to that world, your eyes saw things and your eyes could give you away, and your tears could give you away, and your emotional response could give you away, and consequently Karski got the hell out of there. He carried their demands. They wanted him to say, what do you want from the Allies? A public announcement that preventing the physical extermination of the Jews become part of the Allied war strategy. The Germans fought 2 wars, the war against the Jews and the World War. The American and Allied governments fought 1 war, the World War. They only said only then, we'll hear that in a moment, will they fight the Second War. That the available ghetto data on the Jewish ghettos, concentration camps, names of German officials directly involved in the crime, statistics, facts, and methods be spelled out. Publicity appealed to the German people to exercise pressure on their government to stop the extermination. If the genocide continued, the German masses did not rise up to stop it. They would be considered collectively responsible for it. And in the event that none of the other steps forced a halt to the genocide program, he didn't use the word genocide program, to the program of mass murders, the Allies were to carry out reprisals in 2 forms: through the bombing of selected sites of German cultural importance, and through the execution of Germans in Allied hands who still professed loyalty to Hitler even after learning of their crimes. Karski responded, it's against international law. I know the British, they will not do it. It is hopeless. It weakens your case. The Zionists responded, say it, we don't know what is realistic or not realistic. We are dying here. He arrived in the West. How he got out of Poland at that point is itself a journey. We don't have time to consider it. And he transmitted the message on behalf of the Poles. He also spoke to Jewish leaders, first in England, then in the United States. And he met with Allied leader Anthony Eden, the British Foreign Secretary, in London, but did not meet with Winston Churchill. He met with one Bundesleader in London, a man by the name of Shmuel Ziegelbaum. Shmuel Ziegelbaum was the representative of the Bund to the Polish government in exile. He told him what he had seen, and he told him what he knew. And the next night, Ziegelbaum met with an American OSS officer. The OSS was the American intelligence agency, the precursor for the CIA. And the officer he met with is a man who later achieved fame and prominence because of his service as Secretary of Labor, as a Supreme Court Justice, and ultimately as a United Nations ambassador. And that's Arthur J. Goldberg, who was then a major in the OSS, and who himself was deeply a Jew and deeply concerned about the fate of the Jews. Ziegelbaum asked him, "What will the Allies do?" And Goldberg answered him truthfully, "Almost nothing." Ziegelbaum then did something extraordinary, which is he wrote a letter to the world, a plea to the world, and then he took his own life. And he said, "By my death, I hope that I can achieve a message to the world about what is going on, but I must join my people who are dying, and I cannot live in a world that is indifferent to the fate of these people." Karski was then sent to the United States to tell American leaders the situation in Poland, a messenger on diplomatic mission in a country seeking to garner support for the Polish government in exile and for independent Poland after the war. And he was on his own mission, a mission on behalf of the Jews. To orchestrate a meeting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, Karski met at the Polish embassy with 3 American Jewish government officials close to the president. Benjamin Cohn, a presidential advisor, Oscar Cox, Assistant Solicitor General, and most importantly, the Supreme Court Justice Felix Frankfurter, who had helped shape the New Deal. All of these 3 were attentive to the meeting, hosted by the Polish ambassador at his residence. 2 men left shaken. Justice Frankfurter remained. Justice Frankfurter then paced up and down, up and down, up and down. The justice said, "A man like me speaking to a man like you must be totally frank. So I must tell you, I am unable to believe you." Ambassador Chekhanov erupted. "Felix, you don't mean that. How can you call him a liar to his face? The authority of my government is behind him. You know who he is. We risk men and material on his word. I vow by the life of my children that what he is telling you is the truth." "Mr. Ambassador, I did not say the man is lying. I said I'm unable to believe him. There is a difference." That difference is very important because historians differentiate between information and knowledge. Information is thrown out into the world, and only when it is corroborated and believed and internalized does it become knowledge. I can give you a lecture in sociology on that, but let me make it vivid for you in a very basic way. I hear a rumor that one of my students is pregnant. One of my women students, obviously, is pregnant. We live in a world in which people say we are pregnant. Not quite true. And I don't think that's credible. I know the woman to be responsible. I know to be careful. I know to be, really a person who knows how to deal with herself and avoid this situation. A week later, she's in class, and she all of a sudden asks to be excused from class and looks like she's throwing up. I don't think that she has the flu. What do I think? I think that she's pregnant. She then says to me, Professor Berenbaum, I'd like to meet with you, but you have to tell me that what I'm telling you is confidential. You won't tell the administration. You won't tell my parents. And I say, of course. She comes in and she doesn't tell me that she's pregnant. She talks all around a whole range of problems, serious problems. And I say to myself, she's not telling me the truth. Or not the deepest truth, because I've internalized already the information. So the question in dealing with the Holocaust is, when was the information believed? The information was heard, it was out there. When was it believed and when was it internalized? And what Frankfurter was telling you was that he was incapable of believing it, even though he wouldn't dare say and couldn't imagine that Karski was a liar. Could think he was hysterical, could think he's exaggerating, could think he's misinterpreting, but he couldn't believe that something like this could happen. And that becomes a key to understanding. How we understand Frankfurter's inability to believe the messenger from Poland, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who later became Jimmy Carter's national security advisor, was but a 12-year-old boy when Karski visited his father, who was a Polish diplomat in Canada. He recalled, as a young boy, I sat at supper in my house in Canada listening to Karski. Think of that. Young Karski's telling his story to Brzezinski's father in the presence of a 12-year-old boy. Telling my family about the total extinction of the Jews in Poland, I recall the day the stunning incomprehension of his report generated, for it seemed so beyond any historical experience to which we could relate. In other words, we did not believe him, but we did not believe him, but it was almost impossible to comprehend what he was actually transmitting. Brzezinski compared it to only one other moment in his life, and that is within days of becoming National Security Advisor to Jimmy Carter, he asked for a briefing on the doomsday scenario of nuclear war. He recalled then, too, as with Karski, he could not comprehend what was being said about what the consequences of nuclear war would be. The first time he was a child. The second time he was a man of immense responsibility. The feeling was the same. Unbelieving or not, Karski got his meeting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He found little interest in independent post-war Poland, and even less interest in saving the Jews. Both were peripheral to the global battle against Hitler. Anyone who heard Karski describe his meeting with FDR will remember his ability to mimic the president's gesture. Roosevelt had a cigarette holder with his pinky. I don't smoke, so I don't know how to even hold a cigarette holder with his pinky. But Roosevelt said to him, "You tell your people that we shall win the war, and then we shall take care of the refugees." And he described himself as a 25-year-old nobody meeting with the Lord of humanity. And then he said, by then it will be too late. Unbelieving or not, Karski, public pressure in the United States and public exposure made it impossible for Karski to return to Poland as a courier. So he spent the rest of his wartime period writing and lecturing. His work, Story of a Secret State, Anatomy of a Secret State, made the bestseller list, and he was chosen Book of the Month Club, when Book of the Month Club was really the way of books being expanded. He appeared in the New York Times and American Mercury and Harper's Bazaar. Many of his articles were illustrated. He spoke to over 200 audiences from Rhode Island to Florida. In all of them, I spoke about the Jewish tragedy. Each lecture was reviewed in the Jewish press. He said of himself, "The Lord assigned me a role to speak and to write during the war. It seemed to me as if it might help. It did not. Furthermore, when the war came to an end, I learned that the government, the leaders and the scholars, the writers who did not know what was happening to the Jews, they were taken by surprise. The murder of 6 million innocents, I was told, was a secret. Then I became a Jew like the family of my wife, so all the murdered Jews became my family. But I'm a Christian Jew. I'm a practicing Catholic, although I'm not a heretic. Still, my faith tells me that the second original sin has been committed by humanity through commission or omission, or by self-imposed ignorance or insensitivity, or hypocrisy, or heartless rationalization. That sin will haunt humanity to the end of time. It does haunt me, and I want it to do so." We had a special bond. I'm talking personally now, not historically. I was there when he first spoke after years of silence at a prominent Washington synagogue. I was there again 3 years later at the International Conference of Liberators convened then by the United States Holocaust Memorial Council. He spoke at the State Department auditorium, a State Department that had been, acquiescent to what had happened. The audience was hushed. His work during the war was unknown to many, but his testimony literally sucked the air out of the room. We were transported back to that place and back time. And although there may have been air conditioning on, the room was boiling hot. I taught at Georgetown for 15 years while I was working at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. And each year when I taught the course, I had the students see the moving Shoah, where they heard his testimony. And inevitably, one of the students would walk up to Jan Karski in the yard on the campus and blurt out to him, "I know you, I saw you in the movie, I thought you were dead." The next day I would get a call from Professor Karski. He would say, "Professor Berenbaum," he said in his heavy Polish accent, "Tell your students that I am very much alive. There will be plenty of time for me to be dead." And we laughed. And every time I showed the movie again, I would warn my students that there was one very simple way to fail the course, which was if you walked up to Professor Karski and you told him you thought he was dead. Karski felt guilty to the end of his days that the words he'd conveyed to Ziegelbaum forced his death. He also felt guilty after reading Tom Wood's important biography of him, when he first learned that some of the resistance fighters who rescued him were caught and executed. He was a man of uncompromising integrity. It is a paradox of the Holocaust that the innocent feel guilty and the guilty feel innocent. His stature as a self-described Jew, Christian Jew, is one that I, as a rabbi, respect, even while I consider it theologically impossible. Yet Karski defied categories. He resisted classification. When he finally died, the Jewish community of Poland sent a Jewish star from Warsaw that was placed in coffin. He would have appreciated the gesture and worn it with pride. They made him an honorary Jew. He was one of them. I recited the Kaddish, the Jewish prayer for the dead, that never speaks of the dead but of magnifying and sanctifying the name of God, which Karski did by his very beating. The messenger introduces another generation to this exhibition introduces another generation to Jan Karski, a task that is urgent, and for this we must be deeply grateful. I was in the presence of nobility, and as you are with him tonight, you are in the presence of nobility. And even at a distance, to be in the presence of nobility is to be ennobled. Thank you. Let's take some questions. Yes, sir.
Got a microphone.
Oh, I can talk.
Just wait, everybody hear you.
What do your students think of the Holocaust? Do they think it's a distant memory? What is their level of knowledge of it before they come to your class?
The knowledge, I'll tell you 3 stories, okay? The knowledge of the Holocaust first of all, you have to understand that one of the perils of developing a reputation is the students that know something when they decide to take the course. But let me tell you a little bit let me tell you about my most, and I told Allison the story yesterday. Let me tell you about my most important accomplishment as a teacher. I advised the government of Rwanda on how to document their genocide right after the genocide. When I went to Rwanda, they had open graves. You could see 25,000 people in an open grave in the middle of a town in which kids were riding around on bicycles with all the smells and all of the elements involved, because they were afraid that they would set in denial in Rwanda comparable to Holocaust denial, and we now know that denial is one of the elements of it. And one night I like to walk a city. One night I walked Kigali, and I came to an area that didn't have a sound. Nothing. Didn't have a radio, didn't have anything broadcast, didn't have noise, didn't have somebody slamming a door, somebody opening a door, even a dog or a cat. And I said, danger is cultural. If this is a dangerous place, I didn't pick up any of the cultural signs, so I did what any person under that circumstances would do. I turned around and jogged back to the hotel. I arrived in the hotel sweaty and stinky, and a beautiful young blonde woman walks up to me and hugs me. Doesn't happen to me often, doesn't happen. My wife, if this was not being recorded, I would say it doesn't happen to me often enough, but we'll leave it at that. And I look at her, and I didn't understand why, and I look at her, and she looks somewhat familiar, and then she identified myself, and she was a student of mine in 1984 at Georgetown. 1984 was a very special year for us because I had students adopt the survivor's testimony as part of my course. Everybody was handed out, in those days it was a VHS, and those who are younger will not even know what a VHS is, but it was a VHS, and I had them adopt it. And every time we came to something that touched on the life of that survivor, they spoke up. They personalized it in life. Woman comes into my office, and she says, "Can I tell my story?" An Asian woman comes into my office and says, "Can I tell my story?" And I say, "What's your story?" Turns out she's a survivor of the Cambodian genocide, 4 or 5 years earlier. I said, of course you can tell your story. She began to tell her story. It took about 4 or 5 sessions. We threw out the syllabus, but finally the students got an education. Who was this woman that hugged me? She turned out to have been a student in that class and later became a doctor and was a doctor in Doctors Without Borders. The U.S. Marines came to not to stop the genocide, but to save the Americans. And she said to me, I decided because of that class, not because of me, but because of the student testimony she had heard, I decided I'm not going to leave. My place is here. Now I want one favor of you, and I said, almost like the book of Esther, up to half of my kingdom is yours. More than half, I mean, my kingdom is not 127 villages, towns, etc., etc. I said, whatever you want. She said, I want you to go back and meet my parents and tell them why I stayed. And I said, that's a real mission. But what do I mean by that? Which is that students who embody this then go on to do something serious. And if you think of Jan Karski and you begin to speak of the depth of that experience, you understand what's serious. By the time my students are finished, they know something about the Holocaust. And then I'll tell you another story about that student, which is another, a young man walks into my office and he says, gee, I was going to ask her out, now I'm scared to death. And I said, well, you know, courage, young man, courage, young man. In other words, you can't, she's now trying to achieve normalcy, and you have to have the ability to understand and to deal with that. I said, you can take her out, but God, you can't hurt her. And I don't know what happened with that relationship, but I always remembered the tension that he had with a woman who had a backstory that was that profound and that deep. So I didn't quite answer your question, but you'll get the idea that students can get an education and can do something with it. And we never know. If I had not been in Kigali that night, I'm not sure I would have ever known this story and would have ever heard that I finally did something significant as a teacher.
Did you see your parents?
What?
Did you see your parents?
I absolutely saw her parents. And I got to tell you that I'm now very used to public appearances and stages and all this stuff and lectures. And like there are 2 times that I have gotten scared. One is to meet her parents was one of the most frightening experiences in my life. And the other is that every once in a while they invite me to speak to kindergarten. And I stay up the night. I can speak to you guys all night long, but put a bunch of 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds there, as beautiful as your daughter, and that scares the hell out of me. But that's good. You got to confront your fears. Other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
I spent a good deal of time trying to figure out exactly how to ask or what to ask. How did you first meet with Karski, and how did it affect you at that time?
The question was how did I first meet with Karski and how did it affect me that time? I met with him first when he spoke at a synagogue in Washington and spoke for the first time about his experience. He hadn't spoken in 30 years. Now you have to understand something, that this was in the late 70s. And the late 70s was a very significant turning point in our understanding of the Holocaust. Late 70s came at a moment in American culture, and I'm saying this because we may be coming at the opposite moment of this, came a year after Roots, and that was also the year in which the docudrama The Holocaust was greenlit for television. When the docudrama The Holocaust played, and it's remarkable because it's not that good, but it had an enormous impact at that point, and all of a sudden people wanted to hear survivors' stories. And one of the and survivors will tell you that one of the reasons they didn't speak is because no one was prepared to listen. Or if they listened, they would say we all had tough times. We in America during this part, and we had a quota on what we could eat. We had rations and all of that. So we also suffered, and that turned them off dramatically. So all of a sudden, everybody was interested in hearing the story. And Karski had an enormous story to tell. Washington was his hometown. He had taught people who later became president. One of the people he had taught was a young guy by the name of Bill Clinton. And he spoke, and I felt that I was in awe. I was a young man. I was in my early 30s at that point, maybe even younger than that. I was, and here's a man who had gone through this. You also have to see the physicality of it. He goes back there. When he spoke about this, he is not telling you. I teach people how to interview, and I say, lots of people have a rehearsed narrative. Everybody who goes out on a date has a rehearsed narrative. You go out on a date, your first date, somebody says, tell me a little bit about yourself. You can virtually write the script now because you know exactly what you're going to say and what you're not going to say. Karski was speaking out of his soul with experiences that he had not lived in 25 years. And it was still a time when some of those people were still alive. And consequently, you felt that you were in the presence of that. Later, when I saw him routinely, a meeting with him was, we didn't talk about sports, we didn't talk about spouses, we talked about serious issues. And you were in the presence of somebody you felt was of monumental importance and of monumental moral importance. And, we joked occasionally. We drank more than occasionally. And because he was Polish and I don't drink that much, we did about 4 to 1. We didn't have Uber in those days, so it was a very different thing. But you felt you're in the presence of such substance, of such nobility, of such grandiosity. And when you're a young man and you meet greatness, you understand something about what greatness is. And even if you can't emulate it, you at least, if you have a decency, you can respect it. And you can revere it, and you can cherish being in the presence of it. And that's it. And I had a colleague at the Holocaust Museum who was really one of his last friends. You reach a certain stage of life and you don't make new friends as much as you cement long-time friendships of a very long time. And he was with him to the edge of death. And we saw how he took it, we saw how he faced it. And I learned something about death from him also, which is if a person knows how to live and really lives with integrity, they ultimately know how to die. And to die as they lived and to die with integrity. And that was him. And that was him. He also had, when you go to Poland now, you have two statues of Karski. One is a statue right outside of the museum called Poland, right next to the Warsaw Ghetto Monument. The Warsaw Ghetto Monument is here, the museum is in back, and Karski's sitting a little bit to the left of it. And I always say that that sculpture also captures something else about the physicality of Karski. I told you ramrod straight, I'm a guy who schlumps, and he was like this. I mean, to his old age. But the other thing is he had the most beautiful hands I'd ever seen in a man, and I don't know that I've noticed any other man's hands. No, I say this too. I have a friend who is a sculptor who said, I just want to sculpt the hands. We'll leave the rest. He had the most beautiful. Always wore long sleeves, even the height of summer. And one of the reasons he couldn't go back to Poland was because he was identifiable by the scars on his left arm, where he'd attempted suicide. So he was physically marked in a very basic way. And there was a very high price on his life. Never went to Poland when Poland was not a democratic society. Fiercely patriotic Pole, fiercely anti-communist Pole. And then he was featured in Poland and revered in Poland as a Polish patriot and ultimately a Polish hero. The second statue of Karski is right outside the historic synagogue of Rabbi Moshe Isserles, the Ramuz Synagogue in Krakow. It's on the great square in Kazimierz, and it's at one of the most important Jewish places in all of Poland. And they decided to put Karski there. And when I go to Poland, I sometimes just sit there and listen to how other people describe Karski. And every once in a while I accidentally say, I knew Karski, and then all of a sudden I get the opportunity to teach the legacy to somebody else. But that's one of the joys of being here this evening, which is to share with you this legacy of this man. Now, I want to say one more point, because you have a picture there of Karski in Shoah. He was interviewed in Shoah. Shoah appeared in '84, which gave him a great visibility. But understand what Claude Lanzmann did as a technique. Lanzmann did not accept in film people telling you their rehearsed narrative. If you asked Karski to describe his meeting with Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he would say it in the same words, with the same gesture, with the same nuance, with the same flair, and I could wake him from the dead and he'd still be able to tell it precisely that way. Lanzmann asked him to tell the story that nobody really was quite interested. What was it like to walk into the ghetto? And he walked into the ghetto in 1942 after 265,000 people had been deported to Treblinka between the 23rd of July and the 21st of September. On the Jewish calendar, that was between Tisha B'Av and Yom Kippur. And he walked into a ghetto where everybody had lost somebody who was essential to their life. And he stammered. And Karski, who could be enormously articulate, couldn't quite find the words. But Lanzmann, as a technique, I'll give you another example, because I do it when I talk about interviewing survivors. He interviewed a man, and there's a new film out, The World Will Tremble, which is about the death camp of Chelmno, the first of the death camps, and incredible film. But he meets with one of the two survivors of Chelmno, who ended up having to dig up the bodies, and among the bodies he dug up were the body of his mother and his sister. Every other human being would have said, "How did you feel?" Isn't that your first instinct? How did you feel seeing this? And the reality is that would have shut down all conversation. How did I feel? I felt awestruck. I couldn't feel. I became, stunned. I was in shock. Karski asked, a landsman asked him a very simple question. He said, "How did you recognize them?" And in the 10 seconds, the 20 seconds, it could have been even a minute and a half between when he asked the question and when the guy answered the question, you could see him go back to that moment in time and try to see it in order to answer the question. And ultimately said, "I recognized her coat." But again, he's seeing it, and in film, it is all the difference in the world because he's telling you the whole story in the anguish of his face. And that's my experience with Karski and my joy of that very, very special memory. Yes?
So you said that you felt like right now, historically, we're in another cusp of some sort. In what way is it similar to what was going on in the
Well,
70s?
the question becomes what we were discovering in that period of time in the 70s. Remember, we had just been through the civil rights movement. We'd put an end, or so we thought, we'd put an end to legal discrimination and to segregation. And we were now making room in the American mainstream for marginal stories that told of the dark side of the United States of America. As a historian, we believe that telling the dark side enables you to learn from that past and to transform the future. And some of us are fearful with what's happening if the Smithsonian cannot tell the truth, or if all we want to tell is the good narrative of American history. And that's why I think, without going into all the politics of this moment, that's why I think that we're at a different time. Remember, slavery then could go into the mainstream of American television. And television as an art form is the art of the middle. I mean, who watches television? The entire American people. You don't put radical things on television in the same way that you can in movies or in theater or whatever have you, because it goes into your living room. It's where you live. And consequently, but that, during a period of time, we brought in the experience of African Americans and the experience of the Holocaust, and included in that is the experience of American inaction. And consequently, my fear is that we are now going to go into where all of American history is glory and wonder. There is great wonder. I am a deep patriot of this wonderful country. But one of the reasons the country is wonderful is because there is American ideals, American reality, and American what? Repair. We have learned over time to increase human rights and human dignity. And I hope that we understand that those are some lessons we can learn from history. And, as a historian, our task is to tell what we know and to tell the truth. And you can't censor that. That's not being anti-American. That's being essentially not only pro-American, but trying to make America better. And why do you try make American better is not because you don't care for the country, but because you deeply care for the country. And I said the other day, we can love the imperfect, If I wasn't loved with the imperfect, my marriage would not have endured. I won't say the opposite. My wife is a different story, but she's got to love the imperfect. Otherwise, she couldn't stay married to me. Now, she doesn't have to accept the imperfect, as she scolds me when I do wrong things. Right? But she's got to love the imperfect. So you can love the imperfect, you can be committed to the imperfect, but you have to tell the truth about where you come from. Thank you. Yes, please.
One more question. I encountered you at Auschwitz. I was there with Eva Kor, and you joined us for a little while. And I thought I would ask what your perspective was on her rather controversial ideas of forgiveness.
Well, let me say a couple words. Eva Kor was a survivor who was very famous because of work she did a film and work called Forgiving Dr. Mengele, and she had to, in a very deep sense, purge the hatred within her by coming forth with forgiveness. I'm a son of a bitch bastard who believes that, who thinks that cheap grace is bad, which is that the Jewish concept, and in her, we were friends, and in her movies, I play the protagonist. In other words, I play the person who says that what forgiveness requires, this is Maimonides pure and simple, forgiveness in Judaism requires three things: acknowledging the sin, confessing the sin, and then accepting that you will not do that again. Anybody who does that is entitled to forgiveness. But I'm not a Protestant who wants to give out grace and says, you don't have to go back and work at it. The Catholics and the Jews both know how to deal with sin, right? You wouldn't be in business without sin, right? What? Well, Catholics know how to deal with sin. What's the classical Jewish telegram in the days when we had something called a telegram is start wearing letter to follow. The classic Jewish note from your mother is feel guilty, reasons to follow. And I had a wonderful mother. So my sense with Eva was that Eva was trying to purge something from herself, which is perfectly acceptable. But I'm much more interested in the human struggle for transformation, which demands three stages. One is acknowledgement, which is acknowledgement, confession, and an acceptance that one has to transform oneself in the future and cannot repeat it. And therefore, we did that. And let me say that I had a very incredible experience with Eva that touched me dramatically, which means you can disagree deeply without being disagreeable, which is that she wanted to be the speaker at the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz. And I'm on the International Council of Auschwitz. She gave me her speech. It was July 2nd, 2019, and the event was going to be January 27th, 2020. She gave me her speech on July 2nd. I took it with me to read and to give to the director of Auschwitz, with or without my endorsement, because I didn't read it. And then she died on July 4th. And then I had the question is, what do I say at her funeral? You can't attack a person at their funeral. So I decided that the most appropriate thing to do was to say a word or two about our friendship and then to read her final words. And I could not have, and I deliberately, when I heard she had died, I deliberately kept that unopened until it was time. And that was the way in which I honored her. And very important and very significant. But I'm a hard-nosed bastard. If you're gonna do something, you got to work for it, and that's the difference. I say that without anger, because Eve is a friend, her son is a friend, her late husband was a friend, but we disagreed fundamentally on that. But thank you for asking. You know, it's incredible. It's incredible. This is the second person today, right? Second person today who has been here. We were stopped on the street. Second person today with whom I was at Auschwitz. It's really, and this is Knoxville, Tennessee, not exactly a place where one would expect that as a routine. So thank you for asking, and thank you for going when you went. Any other questions? Yeah. Well, we've opened up the stall. Yes.
So you warmed up the auditory, I guess. Thank you very much for such a wonderful lecture. And I have a question. Have you ever have you ever discussed with Karski what would happen if he didn't make it through one of these, torture things or something like that? So what can happen differently? And the second one.
Well, we know what happened. He had reached. Look, he had reached the end of his rope, and he. You have to imagine a 25-year-old who's been taking incredibly great risks, who said that I may not be able to withstand torture, and who chose, rather than to betray, to take his life. He wasn't good at it, thank God. Seriously, imagine what it is to be a 25-year-old young man, to be, and to come to the conclusion that I've withstood one round of torture, I don't know if I can withstand another. I mean, that's an incredible thing. And the integrity of saying, then I won't allow them to break me. My life is not as significant as this cause. So that's the consequence. You don't have to say much more than that. I never had the interest or curiosity to say, and how did they torture you? What did they do? I didn't need to know those details. It's a very different thing. You have a second question.
And the second question is, so do you think that actually, so you mentioned also a couple other cases for the genocides and so on. So do you think that humanity in general learns something, or in order to prevent
I think some of humanity has learned something. Not enough of humanity has learned something. And, I've been writing an awful lot about, there's a criticism, how the hell can we have such increased anti-Semitism if Holocaust education has been successful? And, one of my responses is very easy. Imagine if we didn't have Holocaust education, what anti-Semitism might look like today. Imagine, but having said that, I've been writing, what do we have to do differently? And one of the things and we can't come to an easy conclusion. We can't come to the conclusion never again. Because not the Holocaust, but genocide has happened again and again and again. So we have to say, not on my watch, not with my assent, not without my condemnation, not without my action. And I tell a story which has been guiding me in the last years all over the world, which is a wonderful Hasidic story. A Rebbe once said, sometimes you yell at the world to change the world, and sometimes you yell at the world to make sure the world doesn't change you. But both times you have to yell at the world. And I mean that in the utmost of seriousness. You have to yell both times, because you can't accept what's happening. And there's too much hatred in this world. There's too much rage. There's not enough kindness. There's not enough compassion. There's not enough decency. And it's happening, that type of anger and fury and like, happening all over the world. And I am less confident of the direction that America is going in than I have ever been. And that's not a political statement, it's a deeply personal statement. Because if we allow anger and fury and division to do it, look, when I teach the Holocaust, I say Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Adolf Hitler came to power at the same time. Roosevelt came to power, Hitler came to power on January 30th, 1933. Hitler came to power not on January 20th. Remember, we used to inaugurate a president on March 4th at that point. He came to power on March 4th. They both governed for 12 years. Roosevelt died on April 12th, 45, Hitler on April 30th, 45. What is the difference between Roosevelt and Hitler in a first sense? Both came where essentially they had 25% unemployment and 40% decline in gross national product. What is the difference between them? One turned the nation one toward another, and one turned the nation one against the other. Now, our dilemma at this moment in the United States is we have that option. Do we turn toward each other? Do we turn against each other? And we're dealing at a moment where we had 4% unemployment rate and where we're the wealthiest country in the world. So how can we not be turning one toward another instead of one against another? I mean that, in the most elemental sense of the term. We're all in this together. And that was what Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and not a political statement, not Democrat, Republican, it's the difference between dividing your nation and uniting your nation. And that's terribly important. Yes, sir.
Would you please tell us your anecdote about Netanyahu?
I double dated with Benjamin Netanyahu when I was a young man. Be very careful, I didn't date Benjamin Netanyahu. And I came away with the date telling my date that I would never go out with him again. And that is the woman I was dating was the best friend. I guess I can say the girl I was dating was the best friend of a girl that he was dating at that point. So I said, we're not going out with them again. And I haven't changed my mind since.
We have some hors d'oeuvres and some drinks and things, so people just like to stick around and enjoy the sort of after party. You're welcome to do so. Just stick around and have a lovely evening. Thank you all for coming, and thank you for supporting this society.